Buongiorno. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much to Hedge Invest for inviting us. It's very much appreciated, and we're very happy to be here. My name is Matthew Hosack, and I'll give you a very quick background as to who I am. I grew up in Zimbabwe. I grew up in Zimbabwe. My father was a tobacco farmer. I went to primary and secondary school in Zimbabwe. I studied at the University of Cape Town, did a business science degree there, and I've worked directly and indirectly for Rich since 2005. After university, I moved to London. Zimbabwe was going through a very tough stage, and it was wise, I think, for me to start my career in London. And 2 years ago, I moved my family back to Zimbabwe, which says a lot, I think. But in 2009, I left SAC Capital and joined Rich in investing in Africa. So I think my job today is to try and, the video did a very good job at explaining what Africa is about and what is driving the growth in Africa and why it is so attractive. So please excuse me if some of the things that I bring up is a repeat of what was mentioned in the video. But Africa, as you know, is not just one big country, as people tend to treat it. There are 54 different countries, over 1,000 different languages, and each country has its own idiosyncrasy, its own dynamic, its own culture, and its own currency. This is what I think Rich was talking about when he was explaining the inefficiencies in Africa, because when the oil price drops, there are some countries that benefit, there are other countries that obviously it has a detrimental effect on. As was mentioned, the GDP growth in Africa is about 5.5% for 2015. I think this compares to 2% in Europe and maybe 3% in the rest of the world. So despite all of our problems, Africa is growing, and the statistics are there to prove it. I would like to mention a few drivers as to why we as a team believe that Africa is going to continue to grow. I think there have been a lot of peaks and troughs in Africa where people have become hopeful and then been disappointed, become hopeful and then been disappointed. And we believe as a team that there are four main reasons as to why Africa is going to continue to grow. The first is population growth. We see it on the ground. This is just a very simple graph explaining, taking a base from 2010, how fast the African population is going to grow between 2010 and 2050. The African population will grow 145% versus 43% in the rest of the world. And most of that 43% growth is attributable to Africa. 42% of the African population is under the age of 14. And this compares to 14% in Italy. So Italians, 14% of your population is under the age of 14, and it's 42% in Africa. And it's 50% of the population is under the age of 19. This is very powerful, we believe. Working age population is the most important statistic to look at, we believe. If you look at this chart, Uganda is a country of close to 40 million people. Its population will grow 250% by the year 2050, according to the UN. Ethiopia, almost 100 million people. That's going to grow 160% between now and 2050. These are very powerful statistics, and we think they'll continue. I'm sorry to bore you with more numbers and tables, but if I can just try and focus your attention on a few of these numbers. GDP per capita in Africa, $1,600 per annum. Nigeria, $500 per annum. The GDP per capita in Italy is 36,000. And if you went to Nigeria today, you would not think that you are 70 times more productive than the average Nigerian person. They are very dynamic, very capitalist, and hungry to make money. So we think that $1,600 could go to $3,000. That's not a lot to ask, but it's a 100% increase. And so this is a very powerful thing for us. Life expectancy is 58. The UN believed that by the end of the century, it would be the same as the USA at 78. So again, we're expecting the population to age and savings and spending to increase. But 4.2 children per mother. That's a huge number. I mean, every mother in Africa has double the number of children as they do in the rest of the world. So I just want to give you the economic infrastructure of the continent that we're trying to invest in. Again, having lived in Zimbabwe, I am the first to admit that we are not perfect. You know, our understanding of democracy is not the same as it is in the United States, but the trend is improving. In 1990, we had 3 democracies in sub-Saharan Africa, and slowly that has improved. Again, we're not perfect, but it just gives us, as a team, a little bit more confidence and trust in the ability to invest in these countries. If you walk with me, I just wanted to highlight one thing, that when you go to Africa, and I think Alessandra and Elisabetta can tell you, can confirm this with the work that they're doing in a charity in Kenya, the thirst for education in Africa is huge. Everybody wants their little boy or little girl to be educated. And the primary school enrollment has significantly increased since 2000, from 60% to 76%. This is the fastest growth in the world, and we're hoping that this continues to secondary and tertiary education. As Rich mentioned, I don't want to confuse you, but as a business, Rich has roughly $20 million of his personal money invested in 9 private businesses in Africa. And one of them is an animal feeds business that produces 100,000 tons of chicken feed per year. And what we do is we set up seminars in the rural areas to teach people how to grow chicken. And the economics are, you can grow a chicken for $3 and sell a chicken for $5. And it is astounding to see the thirst for education amongst women, men, young and old. Everybody wants to make money. We fill up halls, we fill up churches, we fill up schools. We even sit outside if there's no venue. So just to say, it's not quantitative, but it really is something that we're starting to see in Africa. The next driver, so we've had population growth, education, and the next thing is technology. Technology has made a humongous difference to Africa. In 2005, 2% of the continent had access to the internet. And in the last 10 years, this has increased to 16%. So again, I think this helps with improving democracies, transparency, the flow of information, the historic way that governments, use propaganda through state television and radio can no longer be used, because people have instant messenger, WhatsApp, they're on Facebook, and this is all helping democracy in Africa. This is just a graphical illustration. In 2009, the map on the left, we had 1 undersea cable connecting Africa to the internet. You had to be a very rich person to have satellite connectivity. It cost a lot of money every month to have that connectivity. It was very slow. And in the last 6 years, we have been connected with 4 more undersea cables on the west coast and 4 cables again on the east coast. And everybody now has, the mobile penetration in Africa, in Zimbabwe specifically, is over 100%. So as people get more and more smartphones and the cost of smartphones reduce, the internet penetration will increase. So I hope that helps. One case study I wanted to just explain to you is in Kenya, Vodafone have a subsidiary called Safaricom, and one of the major drivers behind this, the success of Safaricom has been their mobile payments platform called M-Pesa. As you all know, average revenue per user on the voice side of mobile telecommunications is decreasing. Mobile companies are having to come up with different ways of making money, and e-payments has been a huge success in Africa. So Vodafone did a survey in 2006. 58% of cash changed hands in Kenya by hand. 22% was sent on a bus, and 24% was a money order via the post office. Exactly 1 year later, 47% of cash transacted in Kenya was by M-Pesa. And in a country with a $44 billion GDP, $11 billion was transacted on phones. So that has provided the lubricant to enabling Africans to transact, to do business, to sell and buy their goods and services. Another sort of indication that as a team we look at is banking penetration. Banking penetration is still very low in Africa. And it's a function of many things, but the number is still very low. And when you talk to banks in Africa, there is still a huge amount of growth potential, growing deposits, and lending into a growing population. 20% in North Africa. Southern Africa is slightly influenced by South Africa, which has a very formal banking market. But on average, compared to North America of 95%, it's very low. I moved my family back to Zimbabwe 2 years ago, and 6 months ago I was finally able to get internet banking. This is something that you've all taken for granted for 6 or 7 or 8 years. So these things are helping. Insurance. The average premium per capita in the world is $650. Africa, it's $21. And in a country like Nigeria, it's $11. Again, there's reasons for this, cultural reasons. They don't understand insurance. There's maybe no central database to monitor claims abuse. But the number is extremely low. And we find this very exciting. So we've talked about population, we've talked about education, we've talked about technology, and the last point I wanted to make was infrastructure. Africa is a massive continent. It takes 8 hours to fly from the southern part to the northern part, 6.5 hours to fly from east to west. And there are very many markets in the interior of Africa that, due to the fact that there are no roads or railways connecting them, they are not potential, they have historically not been potential markets for companies, and a potential pool of population that can consume goods. The Chinese, whether we like it or not, are investing significantly in Africa. They have a specific way that they invest. They finance the project, they build the project, and they provide their own people. But the African governments are happy with this arrangement, because they will be left with a port or an airport or a railway or a highway at the end of the day, and that's what they need. So we're happy with the improvement in infrastructure spend in Africa. As an example, in Kenya, there's recently been a deal signed between the Kenyan government and China. $4 billion railway is being built from Mombasa to Nairobi. It's about 610 kilometers. And from Nairobi, that will connect about 4 other countries: Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, and South Sudan. So again, this will make a big difference. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to mention one other thing. There's been a lot of talk about oil, and we've had a few meetings over the last two days where people have asked us about the oil price. There's no doubt about it that Africa is a commodity-based continent, but it is very much less a commodity-based continent than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Governments have been very proactive at diversifying their economies. On one extreme, you have Angola, which is controlled by a family, and they are 99.5% dependent on oil. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have Tanzania or Kenya that have extremely well-diversified economies, from car manufacturing to tourism to agriculture to technology. And there are net beneficiaries of a collapsing oil price: Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, and there are obviously those that battle, like Nigeria, Ghana, and Angola. So there are always fears about investing in Africa, but that's why we think there's a big opportunity. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm going to hand over to Eric.